you think, how am I going to fund a movie, and you think, I got to get an investor, or I got to get a studio to approve my script and give me money. And in a perfect world, I would just be the director, and, I would just be approving the cast, and I would be, doing all that. But that's just not what it is. This is my first feature that I'm self-funding, that I have full creative control over, which means, okay, I have a lot of work to really make this happen.
Jay Worsley, welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks, man.
In 2017, I was scrolling through Instagram, and I saw this guy with this amazing cinematography, drone aerial wedding, and you were amazing, man. I saw what you were doing. Your cinematography, your filmmaking was amazing, and so I started following you then. And since that time, I've seen some of your work that you've posted, building your video production company, and now making a feature film. So it's really cool to finally connect and have you on the podcast, man.
Dude, that means so much that you've stuck around this long, because I never even post anything anymore. I think if you go to my Instagram grid, you know how there's you see the first 9 posts. I think one of the posts you'll see is from 2017.
And since that time, you've done a lot of really cool projects, but you've sort of capitalized on it up until now. And that is, you have made a feature film called ReRun. And you're here today to talk about this feature, because from my perspective, I'm I run a video production company. You do as well. But I like to think of myself as an indie filmmaker. I like to make short films. One day, that's the goal, is to make more features. And so you've done it. And you've done it. We're going to talk about the financing aspect of it, the ideation of it. But I just think, one, congratulations for making a feature. That's awesome. And then 2, I'm totally stoked to just kind of dig into it and see what the audience can kind of pull from this conversation to hopefully do it themselves. So tell me, why did you want to make a feature? And then we'll jump into what I guess passion did you have to say, instead of making a short, I want to make a feature? Where did that all start?
Well, I mean, that's a long-winded answer, So when I was a kid, I had a lot of time by myself. I didn't have a lot of friends. My brother, he's 5 years older than me. And my parents, they worked a lot. And, I feel like my dad he kind of has an engineering mind. And my mom was very corporate-y. And then my brother was into computers. And then there's me, this random, emotionally sensitive, imaginative child that I didn't really have somebody I could connect with. So I spent a lot of time by myself, just making a lot of my own stories. And so I had so much fun just as a kid, just making a bunch of stories up. And I would write them down, and they became my prized possessions, were these little stories I would write. So writing stories has always been there for me. And then as, just growing up, going through school and kind of trying to figure out what am I going to do with my life, I never thought I could actually make money or provide for my family by creating stories. So I went through all these different jobs. I finally landed on wedding videography a long time ago. I think my first wedding I shot was 2011, I think. So it was a long time ago, and my wife had encouraged me to do it at the time, and I knew okay, this is fun, but it's not the end game. That's not what I want to do with my life. I want to do so much more, and I just kept coming back to, I love creating stories, and so I kept doing that, just stories on my own, things that would never see the light of day, but I knew I wanted to do it, and so I just wrote down idea after idea after idea. And then after, that was back in 2011, after over a decade of just writing stories, it really formed into, I really want to write this script for this idea, learning how to write a script. I had no idea how to ever write a script. I just kind of figured it out on my own. And then I started these little short film ideas. And then these short film ideas, they were so great to me. I loved them. but I wanted to make it longer and I wanted to make it more because there was just so much emotional depth that I wanted to go into. So I have a bunch of scripts that I've written. And with this one, with ReRun, I don't know if you noticed the ReRun t-shirt here.
Yeah, man. Yeah, repping the logo. Love it.
So with ReRun, I'd come up with this idea for this. It was just like a lightning bolt of an idea that just kind of just hit my brain while I was working with a client. The client, he is an emotional wellness coach for like executives and CEOs and athletes and celebrities. And we like his project was very emotionally heavy. And I kind of just did I just, there's this topic that we had that had to do with memories that just kind of made me do a little side tangent of, I want to learn about memories more because they're very fascinating. And so I just kind of became obsessive over researching memories and finding out that they're just very inaccurate. And what we think really like what when I look back at different memories, what I think is so true more than likely isn't very accurate because they're so emotionally manipulated. And it was just so fascinating to me. And so the more I dived into it, the more I was like, I gotta create something from this idea because it's just so interesting. And this script was probably the easiest script I've ever written because it just kind of
Nice.
it just kind of came out and it just kept coming out and coming out and coming out. And what it was originally going to be like a short film idea, but I just wanted to go deeper into these characters. I wanted to go deeper into the story, and I wanted to create something that was a way for me to kind of get out this intrigue of memories and how we deal with memories. So I wasn't making it really to make this movie where people could watch it and I could make millions of dollars off of it and all that stuff. I just wanted to make something that was kind of expressing how I was perceiving this whole like rabbit trail of learning about how we emotionally deal with memories and how they shape us and how they like really change us and how they're a really big part of who we are. And but it's like they're not accurate. It's just so fascinating. Coming back to like, okay, I need to make this a movie. And my wife, she was so encouraging about it because she knew like I had all these other movies that I wanted to make. I've always wanted to make movies. I've been doing commercials for a long time. I've been doing, weddings. I'd been doing weddings for a while. Then I transitioned to commercials. My wife just knew I wanted to create original content. And then she just like, theoretically kicked me in the balls with it. She's just like, you know what? If you don't make it now, you're just never going to make it. And you're never going to go and make your movie. And she's like, I support you with what you want to do. So if you want to do it, go do it. Otherwise, just move on. And I was like, dang it. She's right. So last year, I'm like, I'm not going to make excuses and I'm just going to make it. And here we are today. Now I'm wearing a ReRun t-shirt.
Wow, that's crazy because I feel that like impending father time, even though we're not athletes, but I feel that like, you know what? I keep talking about this pipe dream, much like you have like ever since you were younger, I'm a story, I write stories. I'm a filmmaker. Well, then go do it, and you've done it. But I think it takes people like that to say, go do it. And I think we're all like that. And maybe if we lived 30, 40 years ago, we'd have to go through the traditional Hollywood pipeline. But now there really is no excuse. I think the important part here that is so challenging is it starts with the story. And I'm curious about this do you feel like being a good storyteller is part nurturing or part nature? Like, are you born with these intrinsic talents and then develop it? Because, well, I'm curious. Yeah. What are your thoughts with that?
Well, I definitely have some thoughts on this. And I think some people will disagree with me. Even like really big filmmakers like Scorsese or Spielberg might disagree with me. But I feel like for me, at least, I feel like for me, it was a gift that was given to me just as a person. I just have this really crazy ability to be very like creative and come up with creative complex ideas on the spot. You know, it's one of those things that
Yeah.
I've just always been good at. I'm not sure if that's just from all that alone time as a kid, you know, and that maybe it is that kind of training after years, after decades. You know, I'm almost 40 now. I'm 39, so it's like after 40 years of just being creative, is that what it's from? I don't know, maybe, but I kind of feel like for me, it comes very naturally to me, and the more I do it, the better the better I get. So I kind of think for me at least, it's kind of they're both there. I feel like it comes very naturally to me, but because I do it so much, it grows and it grows. So just this thing that kind of comes together, and it's these two concepts are
Yeah.
married together just to make it better. But then I've met people who they really struggle with it, and it's a lot of work for them, and they have to they have to put in the hours and they have to put in the time, and I very much respect that, because there's a lot of patience and a lot of frustration with that. So for me, I'm not saying I'm like God's gift
Yeah.
to creativity and art, but I'm saying for me, it just comes a lot more natural to me. I don't feel like it's something I would say is a huge challenge for me to be creatively have that creative mindset, if that makes any sense.
But I think it's more on the story genre of creativity, because I think there's a lot of people in the filmmaking world right now, in the indie filmmaking space, that are great DPs. They're great creative thinkers, right? I'm not taking anything away from them, but I think when it comes to the actual essence of the story, that may not be their natural gift or tendency. And the problem is, like, we're sort of bowing the knee, sort of worship. Wow, look at the beautiful aesthetic. It's so beautiful. The movie that you made, it's so beautiful. But the essence of it is found, like, where you're going to move and shape people, culture, or just make people feel something, evoke change, whatever it is that you're trying to get across. It starts with the story. And if we look at Netflix or any streaming service, we would rather have better quality stories than better quality, shots, I guess you could say. And again, this is not a knock towards any cinematographer out there. I think the point is if you are a storyteller, nurture that more, grow that skill. If you're find another area on set that is still creative and you love the craft, then keep learning that, and just kind of finding your lane, I think, is important. So the earlier you can find your lane is better. So more specifically on the script side of things, how long did it take you to write, and what is your process of writing? Do you like just write it all down, handwriting, on a computer? What do you do for your process?
Well, so it's different every time, but I'll kind of just talk about this movie specifically. So, like I said, it was inspired by a client that I was working with, and with my job and the way I've set up my production company, I travel a lot, which means I'm getting a lot of that alone time again, but I'm also driving a lot. And for me, it's so much easier to just like grab my phone and open the voice memo app and just start talking ideas. And that's how it started, was just doing a lot of drives from the airport to my hotel to the client and just thinking about things and
Yeah.
just talking out loud. This is before ChatGPT was really anything. So it was just recording voice memos. And the crazy thing is, I would never listen to them. I would just record them, and I would never ever listen to them. But it was more just me just talking about the idea, and the more like the things that like I really loved just stuck with me. So it started with that. It was started like, what is this? I have this idea. I want to tell this crazy story about somebody reliving their memories. And I remember sitting there driving. I think I was in Georgia, or I don't remember where I was. And I just remember like being so frustrated because I couldn't think of like how do I come up with this idea? And then the next day it just kind of like hit me like a lightning bolt. Like, oh, what if there's this kind of like hokey science where somebody can actually go to a doctor or something and they can watch their
Yeah.
memories. And then it just kind of spiraled out of like all these voice memos that I just kept recording over and over again. And then it was, okay, I need to sit down and write this script. I've written a couple of scripts before, like movie scripts, and I always kind of look at them like, man, this is not how you're supposed to write a script. But you know what? This is how I'm writing a script. So I guess we'll figure it out. It's probably not the right way, but it's the right way for me. And I just kind of leaned on that. I kind of threw out the window. This is the specific way you have to write a script because the more like podcasts I listen to from like directors like Steven Spielberg or Christopher Nolan, a lot of it was them just kind of figuring it out and doing whatever they felt was right for them and not,
Yeah.
falling into what the industry standard is. So I just started to write a script with the little, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Fade In. It's this like little app that you can have I have Mac, so I don't know if it's for Microsoft. But it's called Fade In. So it's like this software where it's already set to help you write scripts. And so I just kind of like, all right,
Oh, cool.
I'm just gonna start writing it, and actually wrote it from start to finish, which is very very strange for me because usually when I write things, they're just kind of like I write the middle and I write the end and then I write the beginning and then I just like kind of it's this chaotic mess. But
Yeah.
this I just wrote from the very beginning and just let this kind of like as if I was watching the movie myself and just letting it just kind of come out. And I wrote it pretty quick. It's actually my youngest script. My other scripts are a lot older. And this one it just came out so fast and I fell in love with it. And so I'm like, this is going to be the first one. I want this one to be the first feature film that I do. So I think
Did
or
you?
go ahead.
Yeah. How long did it take to
I
write?
think it
Like,
took me like, I mean, to come up with the actual concept of like the characters and what they're going through, took me maybe like a week to come up with that idea. But then to write the actual
mhm.
script, it maybe took me, uh, maybe like 6 months till I had like a really solid first draft. And then maybe like another 6 months after that until I got like my third like really good draft, and then maybe another 6 months to where I'm like, all right, time to start casting this and start giving this to the actors. So I would say like a year
Yeah.
and a half until I finally had like what's in the movie now.
I think one, you start with an idea or a concept or a vibe sometimes, like a feeling. It's really, really, that's like the conception there. And then you let it marinate a little bit. Like you can't say, oh, I'm going to go. I know there's some people that go and write their story right then and there, and they write it feverishly through the night. But I love to let it marinate. And then, but I think what's important though is a lot of times you hear stories that it just comes to them like this muse just telling them everything. However, I think there is that accompanied with the labor of sitting and working through that idea like you did. Driving, going for a walk, listening to music are all things that I find really helpful. It's really great to hear that someone else does the same thing. But I think the hard part for me is like I've gotten notes written down in my phone of ideas, but those ideas will never see the light of day unless I take the labor to not just type something out, but to really think through the story, flesh out the characters. But I love that concept of fleshing out the characters, fleshing out the idea, and then putting pen to paper, so to speak, and then getting to work on it. Because once you have like the main plot points put together, then getting it out there, I think is really cool. So it's good to know though that things take time to develop. And the first draft is, I like to make things as polished as possible at first, but I know that's not what you should be doing. And so it's good to know first draft, get it done, but then polish it up a bit. So now you're sitting with this script. So you of course you tell your wife, you say, hey, I did it. I made my script. It's ready to go. Let's do this. So what are the like initial steps after that to putting the pre-production and then the production together?
So then it was kind of once I had this script, it's like, okay, what is the aesthetic of this? What is the vibe, the tone? What am I looking for? And of course, I kind of was thinking about that all throughout as I was writing it, and it was nothing intentional of like I live in Arizona, and I never thought of Arizona for these characters, and it was not like intentional. It's just kind of what came up of like how I felt these characters were. That they kind of became their own thing. And so I was thinking a lot about what do I want to do? Do I want to film this and direct this? And then it's like when you think about that, you're like, oh, well, let me look at the credits of the movie, and it's written by Jay Worsley, directed by Jay Worsley, cinematography, Jay Worsley. Then it's just like ridiculous, you know? And then it's also so many moving parts. And so I kind of thought, what do I want to, first, like, what do I want to do with this? Do I want to just be the writer and hand it to somebody else to do it? And it was just too special to me that was a no. So I'm like, do I want to film it? And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, I don't want to film it. Actually, like there were parts that I did do cinematography for, but I'm like, I need to find a DP because that way I can just really focus on directing the talent, directing the look, and just directing like this thing that is so special to me. So, as a as a creative who tends to be a bit of a control freak, it was really hard to let go of this idea of I need to find a DP and let them be the director of photography for this. It was really, really difficult for me. So I just kind of had to go through and figure out who do I want to do. And so a good friend of mine, his name's Eric Floberg. He's a I mean, I guess he kind of still is a wedding photographer and videographer. He's a runner. He's a YouTuber. He's great. I've done work with him where I've had to go to Chicago, and I'm like, hey man, I need some help with a project. And then I did a passion project for a Nike thing, and I wanted him to be in it because he's a runner. And so it's just like I realized like, man, me and him have such good chemistry and communication, and I'm like, I really love his work too. And he came out with this short that he did in partnership with MusicBed, and I was watching it, and I'm like, man, this is so good. Like I really just like it's just really great. I'm like, you know what? I think I'm gonna ask him to DP it. And so when I asked him to DP it, we were figuring out locations. In my head, I was like, I need to do this in Los Angeles because that's where a lot of the talent's probably going to be. And then the more we were going back and forth, he's just like, look, man, it would be easier if we just did it in Chicago. And when he said that, it just like clicked. It was like, wait, yes, of course. Why wouldn't it be in Chicago? And like when I was thinking about the characters, it's almost as if that's just kind of where they always were in Chicago. And it just like made perfect sense. And so I'm like, okay, great. Now I've got my DP. Now I've got my kind of my location. I know I'm going to film it in Chicago. Now I got to get the talent. And the talent, oof, that was a whole other messy situation that took a while to figure out. But it was once I had my role figured out, then it was figuring out what the other roles are, and it was figuring out now that I have all these roles of like there's the director, there's a DP, there's a producer, there's a sound person. Now it's like where in this where are we going to do this? And it just worked out to be better in Chicago, and then it was figuring out how to find talent that worked that was either in Chicago or could get to Chicago.
Did originally you think that you were going to fund it the way that you did? Or could you tell the audience a little bit how you funded it and why you funded it the way you did? And sort of as the numbers start building up, like what were the thought process behind that?
Yeah, so it's hard because you think, how am I going to fund a movie? And you think, I got to get an investor or I got to get a studio to approve my script and give me money. And it was never really like that for me. It was like, okay, I just want to make this. How do I make this? And it's just starting from the top. What are the costs of my DP? What are the costs of actors? What are the costs of locations? And I didn't want to find investors to fund it because then there's just too many hands in the cookie jar of like creative control, or they start throwing out words like profitability and like how are they going to make their money back? And so that's where my wife and I had the tough conversation of like, okay, do we just fund this ourselves? And the answer ended up being yes, which, I have my wife and I have 4 kids, and I have a business, and it's like we have a lot to just pay for, so it's not easy to just fund a movie. So because this is my first movie, I really wanted it to be special, but I knew I didn't have like a really big budget. So I've been in this industry a while, so it was kind of like calling in favors that I've never called in before. It's like, hey, I'm making a movie. I'd love for you to be a part of this. I don't have a lot of money. What would it take for you to be a part of this? And it was a lot of that.
Right.
And so I spent, over like 50,000 for it, under 100,000, over 50,000, and which like in the movie world is like nothing. That's like nothing for a movie. Even I filmed it during the actor strike and the writer strike, and I had to get a SAG waiver so that SAG actors could be in the movie. During the strike, because you could get it's called, I can't remember what it was called. It's called the interim waiver or something like that. And so
but that was just another challenge,
just another
speed bump to go over.
Yeah. And so I remember emailing them and saying, like, first there are these different tiers. There's ultra budget, there's high budget, there's medium budget, there's low budget, and there's ultra low budget. So ultra high budget was like $10 million or more. High budget was like $5 million. Medium budget was like $1 million. Low budget was, I can't remember. I think it was like $700,000. Ultra low budget was $300,000. So when I was like emailing them, I'm like, I don't know, like, they're like, what's your projected cost on this? I'm like, well, it's going to be under 100,000. Otherwise my wife's going to leave me. And it was
who did you say? I missed that. Who did you say you pitched that?
Oh, that
to?
was for SAG to get the interim waiver. I had to like say what the budget was for it. And so they're just like, well, I don't even know if you need one, because it's just such a low budget. But like that's the thing of like when you're calling in favors, like technically, if I were to have paid everything at full cost, it probably would have hit that ultra low budget of like $300,000. But because people just wanted to be part of something, and people just loved the story, that was another prerequisite. Anybody who's involved had to read the script and had to believe in it, and so
did you do any special things for like pitch decks or like any sort of pitch to present it to Eric himself? I know you have worked with him before, but other people to get them on board.
Not with Eric. With Eric, it was just kind of a Zoom call, and just being like, hey man, like, me, I know you. This is what I want to do. Like, do you want to be part of this? And for him, he had just finished his running documentary, and he just really wanted to do something different. Like he'd never done anything like this before. And so he's just like, yes. And I asked him to like read the script first, like read it. Do you get it? Do you love it? Do you like it? And he loved it. And he brought his friend Steven on. And it was just like a really good thing. But I did more so pitching for the actors, if any, like really for anything. But it wasn't really pitching for them to want to be in the movie. They already wanted to be in the movie. It was more for them to really, I'm in Arizona and most of the actors were in LA and we're filming this in Chicago. So it was a lot of like, how can I get people to feel this without having a face-to-face meeting with them, And it was, I made these little videos about these character breakdowns for each character. And for the people who were auditioning for it, I sent them like, hey, this is the character. And then let them audition for whatever. But it was like these like 5-minute videos about, the character and who they are. And like, it's called source material of like, what source material is, for those that don't know, is it's material that never sees the light of day for the viewer, but the actors know this because it helps them understand why these characters make decisions that they do. So for example, like, did you graduate high school? Are your parents together? Did they split up? Do you have any siblings? It's things like that. It's like identifying all these things so that they are more able to understand the decisions these actors make in the script, so that it feels a little bit more natural to them,
We'll get back to the casting in a second, though. Going back to the budget part of it, what were like, so we're under like sub 100,000. What were some of the big rocks for cost? You've got, I can think of location, your crew, your, let's say your talent, and then your post-production. What were some of the big ones, and like how did those numbers phase out for you?
So I think the big ones were probably talent and location. Talent. Well, and I'm gonna actually just say talent and not location. Talent probably ate up a lot of it. It's not that they were crazy expensive. I wasn't like casting Tom Cruise here. Uh,
Yeah.
all these actors are. I'm. They're not well known actors, but they're trying to break into the industry, and they've done stuff where they have experience, but they're not these actors that are like crazy expensive. Um, but what was expensive was, okay, I've got these actors, and then I got to pay a day rate for them, and then I got to pay lodging for them because I'm flying them out from LA because the majority of them are from LA. Then I got to pay food for them, and it's like all these little costs of just kind of taking care of the actors that really started to add up. So I think
Yeah.
that was probably the most expensive part. And then location.
Because you had the lead, and then you had a good number of supporting roles. Do you have like a ballpark figure of like what that was that like 20, 30,000?
Yeah, I would say it would be around there, around 20 to 30 for all of that.
How many shoot days did you have? As we're jumping.
Yeah. So that's another thing of like trying to figure out cost and location. So let's back up to I started in the wedding industry, and that's where I learned a lot of my foundational like filming techniques. And like with weddings, you can't tell them to redo certain things. So it's like one take, that's what you got. You can't be like, oh, hold on, I missed the kiss, let's redo the kiss. Or I wasn't really feeling the chemistry. Can you give me a little bit more? Like, no, you're there to document their day. And so that spilled into my commercial work. So when I started doing commercial work and I phased out of weddings, I really would only do like 2 takes of something because I was able to I learn how I wanted something, how I would communicate to talent, and how to direct them in a way that was accurate to what I saw up in here or what was on the script. So it was just really a lot of like, you know, kind of just pulling from my wedding experience, and doing it that way made things a lot easier for as far as time goes, because now you have to think about logistics. I filmed this on the Red Raptor, and the way that we did it was we only filmed with one camera the entire time. And so, you have to think about it from a logistics standpoint of, okay, so you're going to film angle A, and you're going to light angle A, and you're going to film it once or twice, maybe 3 times. And then, you're going to shift over to angle B, and you're going to film that like 2 to 3 times. And then you're going to shift to angle C, which is the wide shot, and you're going to film that 2 to 3 times. That already is a lot of time, So it's just kind of knowing like, okay, you gotta know how to direct your talent, get them where you need them to go, and hope that they're consistent, and just really try to go as quickly as possible so that we only had, certain locations for half a day or a full day. And so it's just really like really trying to figure out how I can, like I said, pitch to the actors who these characters are, help them understand the script as well as possible beforehand, and then just so much communication beforehand. And then when we're actually filming, allowing them to take up that role and just not like hovering over them so much, just allowing them to do what they do, which is they're actors. That's their job, Let them be actors and let them take these characters and then move on, because honestly, you don't have a choice. You got to move on to the next scene because it's going to cost money if you don't. It's going to cost so much more money.
Did you get your actors through Backstage originally, or how did you run auditions?
So I did this trick that I've learned through commercial work. And like, what's weird is like none of these actors had ever heard of this before. I'm like, how have you never, like, this should be the way. So the way I did it was I just created this kind of intriguing ad on Instagram, and it was of just like a stock photo of an old TV, and then I masked on different stock clips of like memories, and I had this like eerie music in the background, and it was like the channel was changing constantly, and then it was just like a casting call, and then the ad would lead to what's it called? A type form where they would click on the ad and it would take them to this type form, and it's like, hey, I'm casting a feature film. These are the roles I'm casting. Select what you're interested in. Attach a headshot, and like, man, I got like almost 1,000 submissions from that because people
Wow.
were like, I've never seen an ad like this before for casting. And there was just like, I
So
was,
the benefit of that over like backstage is that you're getting a broader audience, or you're not having to go through backstage. Like, what's the benefit there?
I think the benefit, I mean, I don't know, because I think part of it is ignorance. Like, I'd never gone through backstage. I'd seen backstage. Okay. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'll look on here. And I'm like, oh, I got to sign up for an account. I don't want to sign up for an account. And then it's like, oh, I don't want to go through a casting or go through an agency because when I've done that for commercial work, it's so expensive. So I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create something and I'm going to see like everybody is just constantly like on their phones, scrolling on their phones, you know?
Yeah.
And so
It's a great idea. Yeah. Did you give details with like date and like this is a paid gig, or what? Like, how many details did you give with like shooting is in Chicago? This is when we're shooting.
yeah, it was filming in Chicago and it was paid gig and yeah, I didn't have a date range at the time. It was more like because the date kept changing. It was like, oh, it's gonna be summer, it's gonna be fall, or it's gonna be winter. It ended up being in fall. So but I targeted the ad to be for Arizona, Los Angeles, Colorado. I did it for Georgia. I did it for Tennessee. I did it for New York. I did it for Chicago. Did it for Florida. I'm trying.
And you're targeting actors, right? Or you're
Yeah,
targeting.
and I'm targeting
Yeah.
actors, and then I'm targeting not just actors, but I'm targeting models. I'm targeting directors. I'm targeting filmmakers, and then if you go into an ad and you create an ad, you can also click different interests. So interests that I clicked on was screenwriters, playwriters, directors, and then film critics, just because it's like you never know who knows somebody, you know? So like a
Yeah.
screenwriter might be friends with an actor who is just trying to get into something and he sees it and he's like, dude, check this thing out. Look at this type form. This looks very interesting, because on the type form as well, yeah, I gave a brief synopsis of the film, and then for the characters, I gave a brief description of each character. And then, yeah, like I ran that ad for like 2 weeks and got like almost 1,000 submissions. And the way I managed the submissions were, because you think 1,000 submissions, like that's a ton, is I just kind of became obsessive about it. So as they were coming in, I was just looking at them, just like constantly looking at them, neglecting
Did they do a video submission or just the
the
type form?
headshots and the resumes that were coming in.
The headshot. Okay, gotcha.
So, yeah, and so I was definitely like neglecting the work that I probably should have been working on at the time. But it just like it started to just flood in, and I'm like, I got to get on top of this. Otherwise, somebody's gonna fall through the cracks, and I'm not gonna find the person that I want, and it's gonna be really discouraging, and I'm gonna have to go through an agency and everything. So, those hundreds and hundreds of submissions turned into under 100 of like me narrowing it down, and then throwing it to like for each character, throwing it to like maybe like 5 to 8 different actors to audition for one character. So like there's like 6 or 7 like main characters, I guess you could say. Like there's one main character and then 6 or 7 supporting characters. So like each one of those characters I had for auditioning, I would ask like 5 to 8 actors to audition for it. And then it was just like kind of just process of elimination. And then finally,
Yeah. That's a lot of work for one guy to do. You're the casting director, the producer, you're doing it all at that stage, right?
yeah.
And did you have any like runners up for your lead? Like,
Oh, for
was
sure.
it hard to make that final decision?
Yeah, it was definitely hard. And
What did it come down to?
well, I had to cast the main actor first, the lead role first, because the way the story is he has a mother and a father in the film and a sister in the film. And so that's 3 characters. So whoever I cast as the main character, those 3 people have to look like they're related to him in some way, you know? So it's not, and like people would push diversity, right? Which, that's important in this day and age to have diversity. But it's like, I'm going to cast the best person for this role who just fits the character. And so the character that I picked, he ended up being Caucasian, which meant well, that means the mom's got to be Caucasian, the dad's got to be Caucasian, and the sister's got to be Caucasian.
Yeah.
Where there were a couple other people who were in the running that weren't Caucasian, and like it was like, oh man, it was like so close. But I just
Mm,
really really loved the
yeah.
audition that the actor who I ended up picking.
Yeah.
He just nailed it so well, like better than I could have directed. And I'm like, this is the guy. And so once I got him, it was pretty easy to cast the others.
So like jumping back to the production now, the logistics. You've got the actors casted. Now it's time to, schedule a time to shoot, putting the crew together. Tell me about like that process of shooting. Were there any major obstacles leading up until day one of shooting? And then like talking about that shooting process, because I have a lot of questions there, but anything that comes to mind to begin with.
You know, it's again kind of like wearing too many hats became an issue for me. Because I'm the writer, I'm the director, now I'm like the lead producer, and now I'm having to like also figure out booking travel for my talent and like covering the
Yeah.
cost. So just ended up being like a little unorganized and a little stressful, which kind of made.
Did you have a production manager, a producer to help with that?
I mean, like my wife would help for sure, and then I would have Eric and Steven would help a lot too. So they were like we're all just kind of like producers.
Yeah, yeah. You're all doing everything, wearing all the hats.
And then the final say comes through me, and the final dollar amount is approved by me. So it's like I'm the head producer of it all. It just got kind of messy at some point, just because you know I know in a perfect world, I would just be the director, and I would just be approving the cast, and I would be doing all that. But that's just not what it is. This is my first feature that I'm self
Yeah.
funding, that I have full creative control over, which means okay, I have a lot of work to really make this happen with those limitations.
Yeah. What about like locations? Because you talked about like casting was, or the talent was a big part of the budget, but locations as well. I noticed because I follow Eric on YouTube, and he's a great inspiration and everything. But I noticed like I think some of your locations were either at his studio or at least surrounded with maybe some of the friends he had. But I wondered like what percentage you had to get, like maybe like peer space, Airbnb, calling people. Like, what was your thought process for securing those locations?
So we filmed 2 scenes in his studio, uh,
Okay.
and I think there's a total of like 27 scenes. So 2 scenes were in his studio, and then there are a couple of friend hookups, where we
Yeah.
used a friend's apartment, and then there was a friend of Eric's where we used his apartment's pool, because there's some underwater filming. Uh, so we
Yeah.
used the apartment complex's pool. And then I use something called Gigster, which is like Peerspace, but it's
Yeah.
it's really interesting where Peerspace and Airbnb, the problem with those spaces are they're so clean, and like Airbnb
Mm.
is meant for like you're gonna go and you're gonna stay there, and it's supposed to look very clean and minimal or whatever. But like I wanted spaces that already looked lived in or looked
Right.
weathered, not so tidied up. There Gigster is a platform that like that's what they offer. It's like production ready spaces that you can like you're once you book them, everything is taken care of as far as like licensing agreement or whatever, blah blah blah. It's like you book them and you can use it for your production. Done, go. And so I use that for like there's an office scene, and like we just got to use a lot of it, which was great because
Yeah.
that day they just didn't really have any bookings, and so it's like we got to use so much of this office space. And then there was a house that was like a retro house that just she was just kind of this kooky lady, but a really fun personality. And when I booked it, we were just talking about the story, and she just like really loved the story. And then she was just like really open to me using more of the space without an extra cost, using more time without an extra cost, just because she was so into everything. And she was so refreshed by the fact that, a director was being so open and candid with her about this production,
Yeah.
you know? So I use Gigster for like the really nice.
What about the space with all the curtains? Is that like just an open studio
So
space?
that's the scene that I'm in. So
Yeah.
that was
Good job, by the way.
thanks, man.
Excellent performance.
Yeah, thanks, man. People are always like, they do a double take because they're like, wait, is that you? Because I'm not wearing a hat in it, and I'm wearing
Yeah.
glasses, and I'm wearing a suit, and I never wear a suit, and I always
It's
have
like Quentin Tarantino in his early days. He would act. You just didn't have an accent or anything. Like he's always doing something crazy. But I thought that was kind of cool.
I should have done an accent.
Opening it up.
Well, I filmed that one here in Arizona, and I had a different
Okay.
different DP for that. He's my friend. His name's Seth Dunlap, and he lives in California. But so that space is my friend's church's like main room or whatever. I posted something on
Yeah.
I posted something on Instagram saying like I need a space, and like he's just a friend of mine that I actually talk to every day in a text group. And he's just like, dude, why don't you use this? And I'm like, I guess I could. That could work because it's supposed to look like a '90s talk show.
Yeah.
And like once you put up the big projector screens, once you put those up, and then you move the big crosses and stuff, then you're like, okay, this space could be used for something like that. And it's already got lighting set up. When we obviously,
that was a really cool space in terms of like it was so tonally, I guess, on brand for the film. Like it was just a very unique look that I had never seen before. You know, it kind of felt like the Joker a little bit like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
And so, yeah. And Seth actually had come up with this idea where he saw this still of David Letterman, and it was like this kind of like pink sheer in the background and like this blue sheer in the background. He's like, let's go on Amazon, buy a bunch of curtains, and we're gonna put up like a pipe and drape thing. And we're just gonna put those curtains up to just cover the modern look of this space.
Yeah.
And other than them being wrinkly, it worked out so well. And there was no cost to me. The only thing I had to do was in exchange for them letting me use a space, I was just going to film something for that church for like some service at some point.
How long was your shoot time? Because you have different, like Chicago, you said Arizona. Was there any other like major state change locations, or how long was that? How many shoot days? Maybe that's a better question.
The first, I guess I did it in 3 blocks. So the first block was like 5 days in Chicago. That's not including like travel days, but that's like 5 filming days. And then I remember we had to take a break because like I have.
By the way, were they like 12-hour days that you were shooting?
Yeah, they're pretty
Or
long
10?
days. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it would be like 5 days, and it was right before Halloween. And so like the reason why that's important is because Eric has 4 kids. I have 4 kids. Halloween is a really special, like fun day for them. So it's like, okay, let's film up to like 2 days before Halloween. I'll come home, spend time with my family. You spend time with your family. We'll regroup in like a week or 2 weeks. And so that was block 1. So then after Halloween, I filmed that talk show scene here in Arizona, which was just like half a day. And then I filmed the next block, which is like another 5 days in Chicago. So that was like mid-November. So, and what's interesting too is the first block was a lot of the supporting actors. So it was like the main character, his sister, his therapist, his friend. Like that was like the main. That was the only time they were there. Then the third block was the main character, and then his mom and dad, and then the other. Who else was it? There's somebody else there too, but it was like the first block was like the really fun and kind of comedic elements.
Yeah.
Then the last block was like the like highly emotional and like very intense scenes. So they're just like very different.
Yeah, right. Spoiler for people who are new to making films: you don't film scenes chronologically.
Yeah, the first scene we filmed, the very first scene we filmed was the last scene in the film, which is like it's at a restaurant bar, and it's like that was the first thing that we filmed. So
yeah. So did you use like Studio Binder to organize all of that? Have you ever used that?
I probably should have.
Either way, I mean, there's different organization methods, but it does help to know, like, okay, you can save a lot of money by organizing it the way that you did, using the resources that you had. So I think that's really interesting. And then, like, what are we're kind of like jumping back to the beginning of this, but like your tonal references, like your movie references, how much did that play into sort of crafting the tone visually and I guess the message wise, or what different aspects affected what?
Well, you've seen the movie.
Yeah.
There are a couple of references to just like there's like a nod to certain movies. Like there's a nod to the Joker. There's a nod to like La La Land. There's a couple other movies in there. And it's just like I just did that for fun, you know? Cause
Eternal Sunshine,
it's like,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Everything Everywhere All at Once. So there's a couple of
Yeah.
nods to that, but the tone, I went on to what's it called? It's called
Shot deck
yes.
or
Yeah. Shot Deck.
Yeah.
I went to Shot Deck and I just found a bunch of references from like those movies. And I realized like as I was like on set filming it, like this is not going to be any of that, you know? And it's not supposed to be, which is okay. I was kind of
It's supposed to be its own
yeah.
film,
And like
its own thing, yeah.
sure it might have like similarities to different films of style and look, but I just kind of like after like the first day of filming that first scene in that bar, I was like, you know what? I am going to get out of my head what I have of like tone and look and just kind of lean into what we have and just really lean into the emotion that I'm trying to convey in this and
Yeah.
let that just shine for itself. And then it kind of has its own kind of feel to it now, you know?
Yeah. No, what so you used the red Raptor, you said, to shoot. What about your lenses? Because they had a nice look to it.
Yeah, so that was a hard choice. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna use Cook lenses, you know, because those are the best. And then like, oh, I didn't have the budget for it. So my friend Seth, who had filmed the TV show part, he used to live in Nashville, and I used to do some work out there, and he got me connected with this rental house out there called Contrast Cinema or something like that. They're great. They have like really interesting lenses or rehoused lenses. And I was just looking at everything they had. And what I ended up picking was their rehoused Canon FD lenses. And like one of like what these lenses are known for is there's this 50 millimeter Dream lens, which is like a 0.9 f-stop. And so they're just like these older lenses that just they don't have this like
Was that the one to like depict certain, I don't want to spoil it for people, but is that what you used to depict certain like flashback scenes?
yeah, I mean, yeah, for
That
sure.
lens,
Yeah,
or-
because it's like there's such shallow depth of field, like nothing's in focus
Yeah.
at that point, which is like
Right.
very intentional. Like, when you're looking back at different memories, it is kind of
Right, it's a
fuzzy.
little foggy. Yeah.
But it was just like, it was cool because, in the corporate world, everything has to be so crisp and clean and there's no tone to it. And then in some commercials, they just want it to be very like pleasing to the eye. But like with this, it was nice because I could just kind of add a little bit of character to the look and lean into the imperfections of the lenses and just making it feel more realistic,
Yeah, I feel like people focus way too much on the camera and then they forget about the glass, or vice versa. They do both at separate intervals. Like they'll be looking at, hey, I want to see this camera because it just came out, and no one ever considers what lens they use to film with it. And then when they're like, I'm going to buy a new lens, and they never consider what camera it was shot with at all. But obviously you need like a beautiful pairing. But I would say the pairing in terms of character, when you get to that level, is more with the lens than it has to do with the camera. But that's really good to know because I felt like it did have some good character to it. And then I noticed another thing was your VFX. You would think like a movie like this is more intimate, a lot of talking head, a lot of people moving around. But there were like VFX or other shots that you used, or motion graphic kind of 90s, 80s elements, I guess. Tell me about that. Like, did you make that yourself, or how did you develop those?
So having my own production company, and like I have my own team of filmmakers, and it's all great, but I end up editing so much. So I did 90% of the editing for this, and it was just a lot of like figuring things out. I hate After Effects. I'm not very good with After
Same.
Effects, but it's like learning like, okay, well, I got to learn how to use After Effects to be able to create this because I don't know any other way and I can't afford to hire somebody to do it. But there's like this little animation part in it,
Yeah.
where which is like probably the most fun I had editing in the movie, because one, I did the voice of the little character, which was like fun to manipulate and change my voice in post. But what I did was I went on to Fiverr and I was like looking for somebody to make an explainer video, and I said, here's the characters I've designed the character, here's the script, can you create this for me? And like, just man, it just was not working at all. Like there's just like people just couldn't create what I was envisioning. And I found this one person who was overseas and she created it, but I didn't like any of the stuff in the background. And I'm like, can you just give me the characters with a transparent background and I'll figure out the rest. And
Yeah.
so
Perfect.
she's like, yeah, she's like, sure. So she gave me the characters with a transparent background, and then I had to figure out in After Effects, okay, how do I make the background for all this and
Yeah.
make it fit with the theme and kind of make it weird and eerie and off, but like fun and memorable, you know?
Yeah. It turned out great. I was like, oh, this is cool because it was true to the style of the film. I'm curious. I've edited a few of my own short films, and they're so much different than a wedding, than just a commercial branded video. Because there's a beginning, middle, and end. You can't just take out a part of the script. I mean, you could, but you really can't. You gotta have a flow. There's typically a chronological flow there, a linear flow. I'm curious, how was the editing process? And more specifically, with the dialogue, did you feel like you were getting way too into your head about it and you had to take a break? Like, just tell me about just the whole emotional, that process of it, and working through the dialogue in your film.
Yeah, it was tough, man. I can say like I was really stoked about my actors because they were so consistent. So having to have one camera and go between different angles and different takes was really actually pretty easy because they did so well, like the talent did.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my scene, which is the first scene, which is that TV show part, when I wrote it, I'm like, oh sweet, this is gonna be pretty short. And on this, like in the script, it's like 15 pages, which is like basically you have to think one page is like a minute long. So that's like a
Yeah.
15-minute scene. And like I didn't even think about that when I was writing it. And then we're filming it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so long. And then when I edited it together, I'm like, this is not a good start to the movie. It's just way too long. So and then I started to kind of go through the entire film and think, what can I cut out, so that it's a cohesive story and I'm not missing anything, and it flows well because there are just scenes that just dragged on way too long. So I think that was probably the hardest part is how to like take out things that we already filmed that I thought were so necessary to the story, but then I realized, nope, this is just fluff. I can get to the point, and like
Yeah.
that's actually that animation that I was telling you about, that little explainer thing with that cartoon. That was a result of cutting that scene that part is actually in. That scene was another scene that was like, oh, it's just like 15 minutes long and kind of boring because it's just like these two characters talking back and forth. And I'm like, man, I got to cut this down. And how can I make this more fun? And it was, oh, I can create this explainer video, which kind of gives the audience everything they need in a memorable way. And then now I can take out the actors having to talk about that was a little bit more dull.
Right. There's always so many things that you don't think of until hindsight, right? And hindsight is 2020. And then you get into the editing room and you're like, "Oh my word, I missed that." Like insert, or I got to go capture that, or a reaction. Like I've learned a lot with eyeline for actors, and like what they're looking at really helps sell the next cut. I think there's a book, The Art of the Cut. I think that's like a big one. I feel like I get way too in my head when I'm editing dialogue, where I'm thinking way too much about continuity, where their hand was, where their face was. But when you get into the frames, you're right. You know, you have to follow that flow. But when you're just looking at it and you're just immersed into it, and that's hard to do when you're an editor, you're editing cuts, and then you get, like, step back and try to be the audience for a minute, and like turn off your subconscious a bit and just kind of ride the roller coaster and then see what you can change. Because I'll make a film and then like 6 months later I'll watch it, and obviously you're always growing, but you'll watch it like, why did I cut it that way? It's way overly edited or way whatever. And but I'm curious if there's anything that you learned from making this, like a major arc of, wow, this is something I would have done differently in telling the story and the script. I'm curious if anything comes to mind.
I think a couple of things come to mind, like, I'll break it into kind of different topics, I guess. So like when it came to the production and like actually filming a scene, it's easy to be like, okay, this is what we're supposed to do. And that mindset of this is the industry standard and this is what we're supposed to do, so we're going to do it this way. We started production that way, and then eventually I kind of caught on to it. I'm like, shoot, we got to just stop doing that. We just got to make the film, you know, like just like stop trying to be something and just let it be something on its own. So I think luckily I was able to find that kind of like semi early on in the production, but I definitely started with this has to be this specific thing and it's got to fit this industry standard and blah, 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 blah. And then once I let go of that, it became way more enjoyable, less stressful. And then I noticed that the scenes were just becoming more of what I actually wanted them to be. And now it's just a matter of just letting go of trying to make it something and just letting it be something, you know, allowing it to be something. So there's that. And then there's also there, you mentioned continuity, and that's definitely something that I suck at because like even that first scene, that bar scene, there was moments where there was like a cup that was, you know, filled up and then not filled up. And, you know, there was like little things of like people weren't in the same spot. And when I was editing it, I'm like, man, this is a nightmare, you know, because I notice all of these things, and that means if I notice it, other people are gonna notice it, and then like finally I was able to kind of work around it and figure it out, because you know you're also working with AK footage, so if you're working with AK footage, you can just crop in and no one will notice.
Yeah. Right.
So there's that with continuity, and then I think too in the editing part, again, like letting go of trying to make it something and just like allowing it to be something. I found myself trying to stick to certain, you know, cliche standards of what a film's supposed to be, you know, of like how many times do you cut between angles, and you know, you do your tight, medium, and wide, and just eventually just like kind of dropping that and just seeing when do I feel should be the next cut, when do I feel should be the next angle change, you know, and just like really leaning into that.
And I feel like if you have, it's 90 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Hour and a half. Yeah. A 90-minute film is different than 10 minutes, right? The pacing is different. And, you know, people are there. Yeah, usually short films, they could be thrown up on YouTube. People are just kind of consuming that. Or like we're so used to like the reels on Instagram and 60 seconds, grab your attention with a hook. And you want to do that a little bit with your movie, but people are there to sit and enjoy. So they're there for an experience. And the experience is hashed out over that time frame of 90 minutes. So the pacing is different. And but I think when you're sitting in it for a little bit longer, I like editing towards that. Like I don't want to just be making corporate videos for the rest of my life. I want to make more feature films, right? I'm curious now with distribution and film festivals, where is it at right now?
So I'm at the very early stages of that, and it started with, you know, again, trying to be like, well, what's the standard? You know, what am I supposed to do? And then I eventually just threw that out the window because I feel like we're in this kind of interesting part of the movie industry, similar to how, like, what changed with music and like iTunes and Spotify and whatnot. So like before there was the record label. And if you're going to make it big, you had to sign with a record label, and then that record label would distribute your CDs, you know, or your cassette tapes, and then you do tours and blah blah blah. And that was the path. And then so like for me with movies, it's like I'm so brainwashed and thinking like, well, I have to go through a studio, and then the studio, they give me a budget for the film, and then they pay me this much, and like there's a certain path. But now when things change with music, where anybody can record their own album and put it on Spotify and build their own audience and do their own tours and make a great living doing that, you know, they don't need to go through a record label. It's like fully independent. And so I feel like it's kind of similar with what's happening with movies. There's so many streaming platforms now. There's so many ways to build an audience now. And people are always just going to want to watch movies and shows. There's never not a need for that. So I started with, okay, I'm going to just get it out to film festivals. So I submitted to a couple of film festivals. I'd done some short films in the past where I've done film festivals, and I sent it to like, 100 film festivals. Then I get all these, what do you call them? The laurels, that you could be like accepted into blah, blah, blah. So this time I'm like, I'm just going to pick like 15 film festivals that are like high-end film festivals in my mind, like Sundance, South by Southwest, Cannes, the Toronto Film Festival, like all those like ones that are like big. And if it gets into them, great. That's awesome. I'm stoked, because then I can have it in there, and there's distributors there that will see it and maybe offer deals, maybe not. But I'm not going to bank on that. And so the next thing that I'm going to be doing is, now I've submitted to those film festivals. I'm just waiting to hear back if it gets in or not. The next thing I'm going to do is, I've already actually gotten a few distribution offers from distribution companies. I'm just kind of holding off on that. I don't want to do anything yet with it.
When you say distribution offers, like how would they have heard of your film? That you submitted it to them already? Or?
So it comes back to that what I was saying of like with musicians creating an album and then putting it out there and then building their own audience. So I've just been trying to build my own audience through social media and just putting out, a lot of content, a lot of teasers about the film, not the film itself, but just like really great content that gets people intrigued by it. And I think that's the main word that would describe it, is intrigue. And people just kind of like watching the trailer for it and being like, wow, what is this about? And then wanting to know more, wanting to see more. And it's like, nope, you can't see more yet. And so I've already had like a couple of distribution agents reach out and saying like, we're ready to distribute it whenever you are. And it's like, well, dude, you haven't even seen the movie yet, And they're just like, well, we're ready. Like it's interesting enough for us. The trailers, the teasers, the website, the content, everything is interesting enough for us to just go ahead and start moving forward. And so I'm like, that's great. I have a plan B, but my plan A doesn't really exist. My plan A is just, I just want to see what happens with these film festivals. I kind of want to do my own little movie tour. And what that means is going to LA, doing something in Arizona, doing something in Chicago, doing something in New York, where I rent out a theater for like a week or maybe a weekend, and just like I advertise it, and then I do a couple showings, and then I do like a Q&A session afterwards, and then I do the next town, and then the next town, and just kind of doing something like that where it's not this big theater deal. And then eventually I'd love for it to end up on like an Apple TV or Hulu or something like that. And then just create the next film,
Yeah. So it really seems like we have no excuse to go make our own films now. If you're a storyteller, go out there and do it.
It's true.
Because, the democratization of creativity is upon us. It's right here. We're living in that time. And I think it could get tightened more, or it's just going to get messy further on with AI. I'm excited for all the innovation, technology, creativity will always exist, but I think we live in an interesting time. But right now, I think we're all making the excuses of, I'm not Steven Spielberg or Christopher Nolan. I don't have the money. And it does take a lot of that, but it will always be that way. And before everything is just spread across and you barely, like, it's hard to make a voice for yourself or a name for yourself in terms of like building an audience. I don't know what the future lies ahead, but I think right now it's pretty obvious that it's affordable. You can leverage the tools that you have, the friends that you have. Like, not everyone can just go out there and make a movie, but there's a lot of people who have been just sort of priming the pump of their creativity. Go out there and write your story, man, and then and get your friends together and go out there and film it. And I guess I'm speaking to myself that I need to go do that. But
you do.
Yeah. So you've done it. You blazed the trail for all of us, and I know there's others out there.
I don't know about that, but what I did learn was to, like, the biggest takeaway I got from all of this is, before I kept making excuses, when I was always capable of doing it, I would give myself excuses of, I don't have enough time, or I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough confidence, or I don't have the experience in creating a feature film. And like, those are all just excuses. And if you look at those great directors like Spielberg and Nolan and all that, they had to start somewhere, and you can't get there unless you just start doing it. And so I think that's the biggest takeaway I had from it is, I made excuses and I'm perfectly capable of doing it. And why not just go create something that I really care about? And if only 20 people see this, great. At least I did it. And then I learned from it. And I'm able to take what I've learned into my commercial work, and I'm able to take it into the next film that I create. So like, if this one fails, so what, The next one may or may not. Good. And the next one after that may or may not.
Well, Jay, I was fortunate enough to watch your film, so that was a real treat. And I know other people watching this and listening will be able to, in the days ahead, as it gets distributed on different platforms, or however you eventually release it, I'm sure they'll look forward to seeing it. But we can find you on Instagram. I think you have an Instagram page for ReRun as well. Is that right? And other channels, all the channels, just get out there and go find Jay and his movie and watch the trailer, at least get excited to see it. But Jay, thanks so much for taking the time to share your experience with making a feature.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It's so fun talking about this stuff, and I appreciate you inviting me on this.
Absolutely. We'll have to have you on the next time you make your next feature film, man.
Heck yeah, dude. Count me in.
All right.